The next item for discussion is item number 3, protecting law enforcement and the public during use of force incidents. There are 37 individual speakers on this item and 3 group presentations, 1 individual in favor, 36 individuals in opposition, and 3 group presentations in opposition. This item was brought forward by Chairwoman Jacob and Supervisor Desmond.
Thank you. Because of the number of speakers on this item, I am going to limit the organized presentation to 10 minutes and the speakers to 2 minutes each. So I'll kick this off, and then Supervisor Desmond, I think you might have some comments. Okay. It's a very difficult time to be a law enforcement officer. Our brave men and women put their lives on the line every day in order to keep communities safe. Too often, the split-second life and death decisions required of those in uniform are second-guessed. They willingly go into danger every day, and we should be doing all we can to give them the tools and resources they need, but instead, there are those who would handcuff their ability to protect us. Case in point, Assembly Bill 392. I have very grave concerns about this bill as currently written. It would place an unreasonable and unfair burden on our law enforcement officers in use of force situations. It would require them to meet a standard that puts lives in danger. Officers would have to show that the use of force was necessary. For decades, the standard crafted by the United States Supreme Court has been whether it is reasonable. As part of AB 392, criminal charges could be filed against officers who fail to meet the new standard and use lethal force if other enforcement options are supposedly available. In other words, it asks those in law enforcement to do the impossible, to decide at a critical moment with lives on the line and maybe weapons drawn, whether they've weighed other options before using force. Those in law enforcement are our heroes, but they're not superhuman. AB 392 would not only put their lives in danger, but the lives of those they are trying to protect. AB 392 also puts taxpayers in jeopardy by creating a new and significant vulnerability to litigation. Millions of dollars could be sucked up by shoddy trial lawyers looking for a payoff. Folks in law enforcement are often subjected to Monday morning quarterbacking. That really belongs in football. And this bill would make it much, much worse. I want to commend the California Police Chiefs Association, Peace Officers Research Association of California, California Narcotic Officers Association, and the Deputy Sheriff's Association of San Diego and other law enforcement organizations for opposing this bill as written. On the other hand, SB 230 is also under consideration in Sacramento. Before it was amended, it would require law enforcement agencies to adhere to the reasonable standard developed by the United States Supreme Court. But due to the fluid discussion currently going on in Sacramento regarding use of force in these 2 pieces of legislation, I would like to modify the action before the board today. And I'll have the clerk pass it out in just a moment, but let me read what I would recommend to the board. First, direct the Chief Administrative Officer to add to the county's legislative program support for legislation which establishes guidelines that law enforcement agencies may adopt on the use of force, utilization of de-escalation techniques, and training for peace officers related to use of force, consistent with the United States Supreme Court decision on reasonable use of force, and legislation that provides funding for training. Second, to direct the Chief Administrative Officer to add to the county's legislative program opposition to legislation that limits use of force to a standard of only when necessary, inconsistent with the United States Supreme Court decision on reasonable use of force. And thirdly, direct the Chief Administrative Officer to draft a letter expressing the board's opposition to the current language in AB 392 and communicating our support for a standard that is consistent with the United States Supreme Court decision on reasonable use of force. I realize that there are very passionate feelings on both sides of this issue, and today's action is not an attempt for this board to be divisive. AB 392 is what is divisive, and the decision shouldn't be made in Sacramento without our voice being heard, because it affects our public safety and our pocketbook. I look forward to the discussion today on this important issue, and I would put a motion on the floor for speakers to speak to on the modified recommendation. I'll ask the clerk to pass it out to my colleagues at this time. Supervisor Desmond.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will second the motion. I too support the U.S. Supreme Court's decision on reasonable use of force. The County of San Diego, we have the responsibility to the public to provide the best trained law enforcement. And part of doing this is to provide the best possible training when it comes to use of force. We don't need an experiment radically changing the legal standards and all the lawsuits that by doing so would generate. If Sacramento really wants to help, they should help provide some funding to enhance and expand law enforcement's training. So with that, I've already seconded the motion.
Thank you. Under Sheriff Mike Barnett is here, and out of consideration for the sheriff, I'd like to call him up to speak at this time, and then we'll go to our public speakers. Mike, not that you're not public, but you are here representing the sheriff. So.
Yes, ma'am, that's correct. I am representing the sheriff. Good afternoon, Chairwoman Jacob and members of the board, and thank you for the opportunity to speak in support of this item. In 2018, the Sheriff's Department had 446,000 documented contacts with members of the community. Of those contacts, force was used less than 1% of the time. Less than 1%. The first sentence of our 20-page use of force policy states, quote, "The preservation of order and the observance of law are best achieved through voluntary compliance rather than force or compulsion." The use of force is a serious responsibility, and we treat it as such. Comprehensive reports are prepared and analyzed. Corrective action is taken when needed. Referrals are made for prosecution where a criminal law was broken. And any use of deadly force is investigated by homicide detectives, the district attorney's office, and, when a death occurs, by the Citizens Law Enforcement Review Board. The sheriff also has an internal critical incident review board composed of high-ranking command officers, legal advisors, and subject matter experts. That board is empowered to make policy changes, training revisions, and initiate internal affairs investigations. Turning to the proposed legislation at the Capitol. The decision to employ lethal force is the most solemn, serious, and scrutinized choice an officer could be asked to make. Even harder, this decision usually occurs without notice and with only milliseconds to contemplate one's actions. Shifting the standard from objective reasonableness in light of the facts and circumstances to necessity given the totality of the circumstances will require second guessing of an officer's decision with facts and information not available or known to the officer during the encounter. It is not an exaggeration to envision an officer waiting until a person actually discharges a firearm at the officer or a member of the community before acting to ensure the use of force is undeniably necessary. AB 392 goes farther than asking an officer to think more about a decision or employ de-escalation techniques. Rather, it requires officers to make split-second decisions knowing they will be sued or prosecuted. Law enforcement professionals appreciate the trust the public places in them. It is humbling to know that under most circumstances, the only person authorized to use physical force to control a dangerous situation is the police officer or deputy sheriff at the scene. Law enforcement leadership is committed to comprehensive training and education in the principles and techniques of the effective and lawful use of force. We are committed to hold peace officers accountable when mistakes are made. We are just as committed to support those under our command when they use force in a lawful, ethical, and moral manner to protect the public. I encourage this board to support the proposed action as a visible sign of support for the peace officers of this county. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll proceed with those in favor, and then we'll go to those who are in opposition.
Thank you. I'd like to call for the speaker in favor, David Leonardi. You'll have 2 minutes to address the board.
David, since you're it, I'll give you 5 minutes. You're the only speaker besides the undersheriff that's here in favor.
Thank you. It won't take that long. Good afternoon. My name is David Leonardi. I'm the president of the Deputy Sheriff's Association of San Diego County. The DSA is very concerned about pending legislation that changes guidelines for the use of deadly force by peace officers. The approach currently being considered would change the legal standard from one that's been established and reaffirmed by the United States Supreme Court to the most restrictive language in the United States. By creating a new legal standard, the state of California would be placing law enforcement officers at risk, along with opening the door to a tsunami of litigation with local government picking up the tab. The Sheriff's Department's use of force policy is much more restrictive than state law. When deputies violate use of force policies, they are held accountable with internal discipline, and that can include termination. Our Sheriff's Department works diligently to ensure our deputies are trained in communication and de-escalation techniques. We welcome additional training in those areas and will always strive to reduce the number of incidents where force was used. By improving communication skills and minimizing use of force incidents, the public and our deputies benefit. In 2017, which is the most recent year with data, there were over 60,000 peace officers in our nation that were assaulted. That resulted in over 17,000 injured police officers. Less incidents of use of force will undoubtedly result in less injuries. That's our hope. While we already have policies and laws to hold officers accountable for misconduct, this legislation seeks to pile on by creating additional criminal penalties for decisions that sometimes get made in a split second. We strongly believe the approach being considered in this legislation will result in more police officers hesitating to take action when that hesitation will put themselves and the communities at risk. We do not believe it does anything to achieve the stated goal of reducing deadly force incidents. We ask the county today to support their local deputy sheriffs and advocate against any legislative efforts that seek to create a more restrictive guideline than those set forth by the United States Supreme Court. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, I'll call forward the speakers in opposition. We'll start with the group presentations in opposition. The first group will be Jean Hui Tran, Shay Kawano Miller, and Jamal Koretz. You'll have 10 minutes to address the board. All individuals in your group must provide testimony during that 10 minutes, and please self-regulate your time using the timer on the podium. And I'd ask that you please state your name for the audio record.
Hi, my name is Jean-Louis Tran, and I am a local activist here and organizer here in San Diego. I'm here to speak on behalf of Indivisible and We the People Democratic Club to support AB 392. So we all have heard a lot of stories about police shooting in the news. I would like to add another one here for you today to demonstrate some point. So the most recent one is in February. There's a rap artist in Oakland. He just came back from a tour. He got tired, so he fell asleep in his car and happened to block the drive-through of the Taco Bell. When the workers there could not wake him up, so they called 911. 6 police showed up later. A few minutes later, 15 rounds were unloaded into this man who was sleeping in his car. So how did it relate to AB 392? The fact is that this law, you already know the statistic, this law that allowed the police force to use deadly forces against civilians had not changed in 1872. Let's just take that number for a second, 1872. That's when our sheriffs still riding horses. We need to update the law, right? But the key of this law is reasonable versus necessary. So a few days later, the body cam was released, and the video is only 1 minute and 54 seconds. I won't ask anyone to play the video because it might trigger a lot of people in this room. but I'll describe it. 6 officers showed up, and you can see that clearly immediately they pulled out the guns, surrounded the car, right? And the conversation was not about the de-escalation, like many officers here would tell you, would try to portray every time they encounter the situation, similar situation that they were trying to de-escalate. They don't. The conversation literally word for word said, I'm going to open the door and you're going to grab his ass out of the car. I apologize for that word, but that's what's being said. These are our officers saying this, and you know what to do. Clearly implying they are going to shoot the man. So by changing the words reasonable to necessary, let's just talk about necessary for a moment, right? 6 officers showed up. The man still sleeping in his car. Is it necessary to really hold a gun? No. Is it necessary to have 6 people holding the gun, again, a man who's sleeping in the car? And at some point, you can even see this guy, like, still sleeping about 1 minute and 52 seconds into it. He's actually scratching his shoulder. And then we're wondering what is going on. Here, necessary. The police could have stepped back and basically asking themselves, is it necessary for me to do all of that? No. But the conversations have been about, how should I de-escalate the situation? How should I wake the man up? How should I wake the man up without startling him? All of that, had it happened, a life would have been saved. I'm going to say his name now, because I haven't said it before. His name is Willie McCoy. A life could have saved. His death was not necessary. I'm asking you, we cannot hear any more headlines of police shooting. We cannot have our heart hurt anymore. You know this is a crisis, right? So fix something. Do something in your power and do something for the community. We talk about the community here. You look at this room. This is the community asking you to support AB 292. If you want to talk about the escalation, yes, the work that local activists have been doing it, using it. We train our peacekeeping team that every time that we have an event, we want to make sure everything de-escalating. But yet that word is only now on the police department mouth. If they really cared about training, they don't need a bill to get training. All they have to do is just read the headlines and say, I got to do better. Our department got to do better. And let's train people. They have the money to do that. You sitting on the largest county budget ever. $474 million are being diverted to the police department alone. Your law enforcement alone. They have the money to do the training. It's not about the training. It's about accountability. Tonight, every single one of you, every one of us go home, and if an intruder intrudes your house, you take out the gun and you protect yourself, and you happen to shoot the intruder, right? The accountability to prove of innocent is on you. You still might have to go to court and prove that. But when the police shoot somebody, where is that accountability? All we ask is, do better. We cannot read any more headlines. Do better. And support AB 392, because it is the right thing to do. Thank you.
You have I'd ask the audience, excuse me, in order to have an organized presentation and have 10 minutes, you have 2 other speakers that must speak.
I'll speak. That's fine. My name is Shay Kawano Miller. I have been a California relative and been here for about almost 20 years now. I came from Salt Lake City, Utah. I want to tell you guys and prove to you guys that having the police officers train in de-escalation works. In Utah, since 2015, has not had a police shooting because they have gone through that extensive training. Again, training is what is needed. These police officers need to do it. There's new de-escalation techniques that show up all the time. They need to go back in. If it has to be 6 months, they need to retrain, or a year to retrain. It needs to be done. These officers need to be held accountable.
Good afternoon. My name is Jamiel Kuritz. Thank you very much for your time. I would like to take 30 seconds to thank you for one thing, Supervisor Jacob, a point of agreement. You added an emphasis on de-escalation training. I spent some time working for a hotel company, taking complaint calls, being yelled at by people who were angry and wanted a gift card. I had a week and a half of de-escalation training, which I found invaluable in helping find out why people were angry and reducing the number of gift cards I sent out. Every one of you uses this type of interpersonal skills in your electoral careers every day. All of our law enforcement officers out there use these skills, and the amount of good that kind of training could do to prevent situations where use of force is required from happening is vital. I hope we can focus on that point of agreement. That said, there are many of us here who believe the police should be held to, who believe law enforcement should be held to a higher standard. And if it sometimes seems like one group is anti-law enforcement and one group is pro-law enforcement, I'd propose you look at it a little differently. Many of us believe that the law enforcement officers of America should and can be held to a higher standard and perform better and do amazing things. And we believe that it is part of the duty of elected officials to help hold law enforcement to a higher standard. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd ask the audience to refrain from clapping so we can proceed in a timely fashion. Mr. Clerk?
I'll call forward the next organized group presentation in opposition: Layla Aziz, Brisa Johnson, and Flower Alvarez.
Good afternoon. My name is Brisa Johnson. I'm a community resident born and raised here in the city of San Diego. My son is 8-year-old. He attends a school in Claremont, a Spanish immersion school. And a couple weeks ago, he chose to wear a Black Lives Matter shirt to school. And a little boy came up to him and said, "Black lives don't matter." And my son bravely said, "Black lives do matter because innocent lives are shot every day." The little boy pointed a gun to my son's face and said, "Well, then I'm going to shoot you." Pow. The narrative that you are creating in opposing AB 392 is not only pouring into our counties, but in our communities, into their parents, and into the children. And now it's impacting my son, who can't just be 8. He has to be 8 and alert. He has to know what racism is. He has to know what racial profiling is. He has to know about laws like AB 392. He has to hear about different stories about young boys and young Black girls getting shot by the police who are unarmed and not dangerous in any way. And so I'm asking you today to change the narrative, because the reality is I'm assuming that your kids don't bleed the same melanin that my kid does. And so you're making a decision that is impacting our children, not your children. And so I'm asking you today to look at this audience, to hear these community members, because it's our kids that we are bearing. It's our kids that are dying. It's our kids that are impacted by bad policies. And it's our community that is dying every day because of people who make decisions that don't impact them or their children. I'm asking you today to make a decision to support AB 392, not because it impacts your children, but because it impacts ours.
I sat here and I listened because I do know law enforcement has a pretty hard job. But I sat here and listened to you, Diane Jacob, and you didn't speak of any disparities in police shootings.
Ma'am,
You didn't speak of 50%. I can't.
If you can please state your name for the audio record.
Layla Aziz.
Thank you. Thank you.
You didn't talk about the fact that 50% of people with use of force who are victims have a mental health or disability. You didn't speak about any of those things when you talked about this. You talked about the Supreme Court decision. And you knew that the people most affected, a Supreme Court decision, Plessy versus Ferguson, existed also. And it took until 1954 to get it overturned. That's what I call being tone deaf. And I just wanted to give you a reality on why we think training and we think standards on force are both important. One is if our children have a disability and they fidget a little bit, they fit right into your reasonable force standard. For us to look at a Supreme Court case, one of them when a diabetic went into a pharmacy because he was having a diabetic incident, and because he jittered and the line was too long, he left and was beat up by the police, to use that as a standard of what you want to vote on today about our kids is being tone deaf. What I expected from you is for you to really do your homework. If you really want to have that conversation, mom to mom, grandma to be soon to be grandma, I wish you would have really gotten rid of the tone deafness and really looked at what our kids who have IEPs, who are in special education, who are black, who are Hispanic, what does this mean to us? That's all we ask. I know you get a lot of support from law enforcement. I know you get a lot of money for law enforcement. We're saying that our community matters also, and you talk nothing about that because it didn't matter to you. Thank you.
My name is Flower Alvarez. I'm with Universidad Popular, also known as the People's University. I represent the Homie Edition. We also call it Homie Up. I'm a San Diego native. I'm in District 5. I'm a mom. I'm a student. I'm a community organizer. I do a lot of volunteer work. And just last year, I stood in the same space and I received an award from the board. An award for voter registration and voter mobilization for reaching vulnerable and hard to reach populations or communities in San Diego. I live in an area, I live in San Marcos, and next door to us is Vista. I live in an area where growing up, I was in high school, and in 2005, the sheriffs killed 5 unarmed Mexican young men. That is the reality that we face in our community every single day. Just recently, the same police officer in less than a span of 12 months killed 2 unarmed Mexican youth in our community. I have to agree when my fellow presenter said, it's not your community affected. It's not your family members that are dying. It's ours. We completely and wholeheartedly understand the statement you all are trying to do by oppose AB 392. We get it. We're here collectively. Those that stand or sit behind me with the yellow papers that say support AB 392, we're here collectively to urge y'all to rethink that statement you're trying to make, to urge you to not ignore those of us that are here telling you how it impacts our lives and how it impacts our communities. We're here to let you know that we support AB 392, and we will continue to support it through, and that we hope that you reconsider your opposition. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Call for the next, the final organized group presentation in opposition, Flora Rivera, Bree Rivera, and Amanda Lee.
My name is Bree Rivera. I'm the niece of Raul Rivera. On Sunday, May 27th, 2018, almost 1 year ago, my uncle Raul Rivera was killed by 3 San Diego police officers in the intersection of Hollister Street and Tecayo Avenue in South Bay, San Diego. Hours prior to Raul being killed, a community member called 911 to report him as a jumper when he was positioning himself at an overpass near Saturn Boulevard. After Raul expressed that he was depressed to officers, they were able to talk him down, but Raul was allowed to walk away without any of his family being notified or him being taken in for a psych evaluation. As the day progressed, his cry for help was met with extreme violence from San Diego police. Raul was walking near the intersection of Hollister Street and Tecayo Avenue when he was approached by Border Patrol agents who then called SDPD. According to witnesses and multiple videos caught on the scene, there were close to 30 officers that surrounded that intersection. It took less than 15 minutes from the moment the officers arrived on the scene for 3 officers, William Carter Torres, Michael Martinez, and Samuel Rodriguez, to kill Raul Rivera. Officers shot Raul over 20 times and continued to shoot him after he had fallen to the ground and then handcuffed his unmoving body. It took 15 to 20 minutes for paramedics to arrive. Upon arrival, he was already deceased. He remained in that street dead for 12 hours until the next morning. From beginning to end, Raul's humanity was never seen by officers. He was completely dehumanized. Raul has always suffered from mental health, and he needed psychological treatment so that he can heal from his wounds and trauma, not to be executed in the street. What happened to Raul Rivera is not an isolated act of violence, but rather a systemic act of violence that overwhelmingly impacts people of color and other underrepresented communities. As we see in other citizens killed in San Diego by police, like Alfred Alongo, like Sergio Wake, like Jonathan Cornell, like James Lacey, and many others who are black and brown, who did not have a gun, and they did not hurt anybody. All black and brown people simply existing, all riddled with bullets. I, like the many other community members that are in this room, are here to say that our various underrepresented communities are not disposable. Let us live. AB 392 is a necessary procedure to stop unnecessary killings that normalize structural violence towards communities of color. A vote against AB 392 says that the Board of Supervisors do not believe that black and brown people are worthy of existing. So my question to all of you today is how much do you value black and brown lives? Will you let us live?
My name is Flora Rivera, and I am the oldest sister of Raul Rivera. And ma'am, it is never a good day to be the sister of a brother that was shot and killed in the street with maybe more than 20, 30 bullets, because till today, we have the police report has not been released to us, nor has the autopsy report. It took me calling every day, begging for my brother's body to be released so we can bury him. He wasn't released to us till after a month of begging and begging. I do not appreciate the way you started and opened your statement today, ma'am. And I hope you have a chance to look at this footage and rethink it. Because this is the face of a sister connected to a lot of other brothers and sisters. And a woman that shares the pain with most of the people that are out here because they had either a relative or a close friend that was riddled with bullets. Do not discard us like we're nothing, like we're nobody. I am a United States citizen, just like my brother was. He suffered from mental illness. What he needed was help, compassion, taken into a behavioral hospital that day, not to be allowed to spiral out of control. He was a potential jumper that day. The officer spoke to him for 5 minutes, released him, and he continued to spiral out of control. I cannot tell you enough the pain and how much it's broken up my family is, and my brothers and sisters are shattered. Every day, I feel like I'm just walking and I'm gonna pass out. I am a working woman. I have a huge staff. I am a director at my position, and I know this, that when my staff succeeds, I succeed. And if they fail, then I would fail. So therefore, I have nothing against any police officer or anybody in particular. What I want is compassion and proper training, but not to ask for permission. I am a regional trainer by trade. I teach until I know my students have it and live it and breathe it. We should not continue to lose our family members in the streets like my brother was killed in less than 12 minutes. In less than 12 minutes, he was surrounded with over 30 officers, the Border Patrol and STPD. And nobody in that group said, hey, let's lower the lights. Let's stop yelling. And I encourage every single one of you, if you have not seen the raw footage of my brother's massacre, you look it up in YouTube. It's Raul Rivera shot by police. I saw it once and it will haunt me for the rest of my life. And the thought of anybody else suffering that pain is very hard to bear. So take some time and remember why you all are elected officials. Weren't you supposed to represent your constituents? Your constituents are right here calling out for help. I am begging you to do something. I am begging you to support this. And don't just walk in here and know what your agenda is going to be for today, because my agenda for my rest of my life is going to be the pain and the loss of my brother that was riddled with bullets. And I still don't have his autopsy report. I still don't have the police report. So if you want to help me, get it to me. Thank you.
So good afternoon, Chair Jacob and Supervisors. My name is Amanda. I'm a policy associate at the ACLU of San Diego and Imperial Counties. I'm here to urge the Board of Supervisors to reject the resolution opposing AB 392, the California Act to Save Lives. We believe that the police officers should never take a human life in situations when there are other alternatives. This seems like a common sense standard, but it isn't the current practice in California. This is why the ACLU is a proud co-sponsor of AB 392 alongside a diverse group of organizations throughout the state. Too many lives have been shattered by unnecessary police use of force in California. In fact, more people are killed in California by police officers than in any other state in the country. This tragic reality disproportionately affects people with disabilities, mental illnesses, and communities of color. For example, officers killed 172 people in California in 2017. Half of those individuals were not armed with a gun when they were killed. Of those who were unarmed, 3 out of 4 were people of color. Nearly 50% were Latino. Black people were 3.2 times more likely to be killed by police than white people. These statistics are unacceptable. They are shameful. Law enforcement agencies must adopt and use tactics to de-escalate tense situations and calm aggressive behavior. This will save lives and improve officer safety. The California Act to Save Lives is common sense policing. It ensures that officers are trained to avoid using deadly force whenever possible. Specifically, the Act will clarify that police should use deadly force only when there are no alternatives, require de-escalation whenever possible, hold officers accountable when deadly force is unnecessarily used or when their conduct created the circumstances leading to deadly use of force. Every day that goes by without addressing this epidemic of police shootings is another day that another person may be unjustly and unnecessarily killed. We urge the board to vote no on this resolution and support AB 392. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Next, I'll call forward the individual speakers in opposition. I'll call you forward in groups of 5, so please listen for your name. You may come forward in any order. We'll start with Lachey Sharp Collins, Greg Lascaris, Mark Robert, Robin, Ellen Nash, and Lillian Serrano Alamo. Again, you'll have 2 minutes to address the board. Please begin by stating your name for the audio record.
Good afternoon. My name is Lachey Sharp Collins, and I am the District Director for Assemblymember Dr. Shirley Weber. And I'm here to read a statement on her behalf, but also to let you know that this morning they have had a productive conversation with law enforcement representatives up in Sacramento. And I do have copies of this letter for everyone up there as well. It says, Dear Chair Jacobs, it has come to my attention that the Board of Supervisors may consider issuing a letter in support of SB 230, Caballero, and one in opposition to I can't talk today, sorry. And one in opposition to the legislation that I authored, AB 392. Both bills relate to strategies to reduce lethal use of force incidents by California law enforcement officers. As you know, the author and I sponsors of SB 230 accepted significant amendments to the bill in the Senate Public Safety Committee last week. The changes now focuses SB 230 primarily on officer training and include an important provision that explicitly tied the bill's implementation to AB 392 becoming law. The result is that the two bills are now complementary rather than competing policies. In addition, Senator Caballero and law enforcement representative have expressed their willingness to engage in continued discussions on this issue. Because of the recent changes to SB 230 and the potential for ongoing discussions among stakeholders to lead to a use of force policy that will save the lives of civilians as well as other officers, I respectfully request that you postpone any action on this bill until discussion have actually concluded. Thank you for your consideration. If you have any questions or concerns on this issue, please feel free to contact me, meaning Assemblymember Dr. Shirley Weber, or her staff. This letter is signed by Assemblymember Weber, and there are CCs for everyone on the Board of Supervisors. Who should I hand this folder to?
Thank you. To the clerk, and the clerk will make copies if you don't have copies for each of us. Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for the privilege of being able to speak with you. My name is Greg Lascaris. I'm a San Diego resident, and I am a resident of District 2. I am a California native, but I had the pleasure of living in Portland, Oregon for a number of years, where I had the honor of working in law enforcement for Multnomah County Deputy Sheriff's Officer. I worked as the department's psychiatric training supervisor for 5 years. I know from firsthand experience how much stress law enforcement officers who take their job very seriously and really try to do a good job. I know how much stress they are under in very difficult situations. I really believe in training. One of the few points I think everyone in this room seems to agree on is the need for excellent training. I'm just here to say that training without stringent guidelines, stringent accountability, which law enforcement people who are experienced in this area want, so that they know the rules of the game in very stressful situations. Without training, without accountability is wishful thinking. So please, thank you again for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you. Next, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Mark Robson. I'm associate pastor at a local church, clergy, also a member of SDOP. And I must say that I'm appalled at the thought that AB 392 is fought so heavily, because to me, this is a deterrent. We have an epidemic. Black and brown kids are being killed daily. And I don't see any black and brown up here that are making the decisions. I don't see any empathy. I don't see anything coming from you. You know, united we stand, divided we fall. You have to understand that there is an epidemic, and I don't think you get it. I don't think you get it by what I'm hearing you say. It's sad. It's sad to see that we're trying to give you an excuse for an epidemic. AB 392, it's not the answer. It's a deterrent, and it can't help. But it's kind of like, throw it away. We don't need a deterrent. Let's keep doing what we're doing. We're killing black and brown. We're not killing others, but we're killing black and brown. Let it go. It's okay. That's what I hear you saying.
Next, please.
Hello, my name is Ellen Nash, and I'm a lifetime resident of San Diego. I also represent as chair of the San Diego chapter of BAPAC. Also, I'm an associate pastor at my church, Faith Tabernacle Church of God in Christ. I'm also a mother of 2 black boys. I'm also a grandmother of about 15 nephews and nieces. I also am representing those individuals that are at their desks working who are not able to get here today because you changed the time twice. I'm also representing those who are sitting at home worried about their sons at night. Will they be shot? Will they be killed? I'm an experienced parent where my sons have to make decisions every day about where they go at night because they're concerned about they may not make it home. That's who I represent today. And AB 392 that Dr. Weber, a longtime friend of mine, a longtime advocate in the community, has put together, it's about addressing the mindset and the heart of individuals that have to take positions and actions against our children. I'm appealing to everyone in the room that we must address the issues of African American and brown young people today in a very, very strategic and intentional way, because there is trauma, there is all kinds of experiences that our young people are going through. I had a whole nother speech, but these young people here have already shared the mindset of what's happening in this community, and I'm addressing everyone here in this room today that we have to take our young people serious, particularly Black and brown young people who are going through issues today. This is not about just AB 392. Dr. Weber is concerned about the lack of consideration for our children. That's what this is about. And I'm asking everyone in this room, reconsider supporting Dr. Weber's bill. Sit down with her. Sit down with this community. Hear us out before you take action. This is what this is about. Thank you for your time, and please reconsider your actions. Before you take actions, get input from the community and from Dr. Weber. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, please.
As the next speaker is approaching the podium, I'll call forward additional 5 speakers: Rick Bramhall, Jack Shue, Wendy Gallerntner, Larry Stowell, and Danny Avatia.
Hello, my name is Lilian Serrano. I live in Escondido, District 3, but I'm also a community educator with Universidad Popular, educational program in North San Diego County that promotes civic engagement among Latino families. I'm also here to speak on behalf of the San Diego Immigrant Rights Consortium, where I serve as the chair. The consortium is a coalition of over 50 organizations throughout San Diego County that come together to advocate for immigrant and refugee rights at the local, state, and federal level. We're both very strong supporters of AB 392, in part because we know that the use of deadly force has proportionally been affecting communities of color, like previous speakers already stated. I have a whole speech that I'm not going to read because some of those points have already been made, but I do want to talk about how AB 392 actually provides the tools to our public servants to make sure that they have all the tools available to them to make sure that they're not put in a position where they are having to take a life. Think about it. Every time law enforcement takes the life of a community member, we lose a community member. A whole family and support system, including family, community members, and friends, is affected. But also the life of that officer who swore to protect and serve a community who now he's affecting and no longer receiving support and love from. That is something that as elected officials and as a community as a whole, we should rethink about the training that we provide to ensure that they have all the tools and to provide a venue for when community members don't feel that our public servants are following the rules, we can demand accountability and for them to follow. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, please.
Hello, my name's Wendy Galernter. I'm a 35-year resident of District 4. Jamal O'Day was a 21-year-old Burmese refugee who came to the United States to escape violence in his homeland, and he was a friend of mine. On July 13th, 2014, Jama, who suffered from mental illness, barricaded himself alone in his apartment. When the San Diego City Police arrived, they rammed down the apartment door, sent in a police dog, and the dog attacked Jama, biting him in the leg. When he struck the dog to get him to stop biting him, the police opened fire, killing Jama immediately. Under current law, this was deemed a justified shooting. Yet his death wasn't necessary. A man locked inside his home by himself caused no immediate threat. No split-second decisions were called for. Alternatives to deadly force, the use of a translator, the use of a mental health professional or a crisis negotiator were not pursued. AB 392 authorizes police to use deadly force only to prevent imminent injury or death. Jama would likely be alive today if 392 had been the law then. If you vote against 392, then you're choosing to willfully ignore the horrific injustice done to Jama Lode and to so many others like him. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, please.
Hello, my name's Larry Stoll. I'm a 30-year resident of San Diego in District 4. And I want to stress that this is the community. This is all of us. And a lot of white people vote, and we will remember your vote and your actions today. AB 392 targets a foundation issue of police procedures that leads to unnecessary death of citizens by police officers instead of allowing the use of deadly force when it is objectively reasonable. Officers under 392 would procedurally be required to use reasonable force alternatives such as verbal persuasion, takedown techniques, distraction techniques, chemical agents, canines, tasers, extended range impact, impact weapons, and verbal persuasion or other non-lethal methods of resolution or de-escalation being exhausted prior to use of legal force. The police force use of matrix perceived life-threatening behavior would change from what is objectively reasonable by an officer to require imminent bodily danger or death. Please reject this resolution and support 392. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, please.
My name is Rick Bramhall, and I live in San Diego County. I am strongly in favor of AB 392. Understand that most of you are Republicans and are hell-bent on upholding tradition. However, when that tradition is close to 150 years old and harks back to the days of the Wild West, I'd say you've got your brand on the wrong cow. The days of shoot first, ask questions later are long over. And frankly, as a taxpayer, I'm sick and tired of paying out millions in lawsuits every time a cowboy thinks pinning a star in his chest is a license to kill. I understand that every time an officer steps out of their vehicle, they face a potentially dangerous situation. However, potential and real are two different things. Most cops manage to make it through the day without drawing their weapons. This law is necessary because law enforcement agencies refuse to police themselves. And even asking them to do so is as silly as asking a fox to guard a hen house. Over 1,000 years ago, Seneca asked, "Who shall guard the guards himself?" The answer was never the guard shall. In a democracy, the people shall. It has become obvious that we can't trust the good cops to get rid of the bad cops. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, members of the board. My name is Danny Avitia, and I'm a resident of San Diego County. I come before you today as a spokesperson for Tasha Williamson, who is unable to attend due to another commitment with county-wide youth. Tasha and her campaign staff are fully in favor of combining AB 392 and SB 230 because one of them cannot be passed without the other. We've witnessed too many people in this state dying in the hands of law enforcement officers. Far too many of them have been unarmed. That needs to change. SB 230 does not hold accountable rogue officers. You cannot wash your hands and attempt to rescue people with this resolution. You cannot disconnect your responsibility to represent your most impacted people with wrongful death at the hands of rogue officers who often get away with violating policies, procedures, and law after law and shooting unarmed people. Times have changed for the Board of Supervisors, and you guys need to leap into the 21st century with us. In spite of the law enforcement unions, no officers are going to die as a result of AB 392. However, rogue officers will be more accountable with the passing of both AB 392 and SB 230. I ask that you come in line with Senate Public Safety Committee, chaired by Senator Nancy Skinner, and include AB 392 in your resolution, because not one can pass without the other. By including accountability and mandating mandatory training, fewer armed people will die. SB 230 does not hold the weight to change the systemic failure of law enforcement.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Next speaker, please.
As the next speaker is coming forward, I will call an additional 5 speakers: Elon Burns, Alice Pimpkin Allen, Marissa Martin Talbert, Jacob Peden, Alexis Renwans.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Jack Hsu from La Mesa. I'm very proud of my Assembly member, Dr. Shirley Weber, for introducing AB 392, a reasonable approach to addressing police misuse of their force. I say that as a peace officer in my former career, as someone who has taught community policing, community relations. Peace officers are given a wide range of discretion in what they can do. And unfortunately, they've been abusing that discretion to the point in which they have lost confidence from much of our community. And as a peace officer who's been training other peace officers, I can tell you our primary source of safety, police officer safety, does not come from our equipment, does not come from the law, but comes from the people. And unfortunately, that kind of protection is being threatened by their own action, by the police officer's own action. We can curve that, we can change that if we renew the confidence level that police officers need for their own safety. We cannot have the situation in which police officers are allowed to continue to do or continue to define what is reasonable or even what force is necessary in the eyes of, because of officer safety. Officer safety comes from the community, not from the peace officers' actions at a split moment. There's hundreds of things that they can do prior to a contact to reduce the level of threat. And if they just take the time to learn that and use those other methodologies, they'll be better off. We'll have less shootings. We cannot have video after video of people who are either helpless, no threat at all, being completely killed and slaughtered in our community. That's what we have to prevent. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, please.
Hello. First, I want to tell you I appreciate your time and attention. My name is Elon Burns. I'm representing A New Path, which is Parents for Addicted Treatment and Healing in support of AB 392. We are an organization of people and parents who advocate for therapeutic justice. We believe that protecting human life must be a top concern for police officers, and this law will raise California's standard for police use of force to bring it in line with national best practices. All lives are precious and must be protected, so police use of deadly force should be used only as a last-ditch effort. You know, I don't like to Monday morning quarterback because I think there's too much of that going on. People find something to bitch about online or want to say you did this wrong or you did this wrong and you're bad. But one of the worst parts of being human nowadays is nobody wants to take accountability, and everybody seems to be able to bend over backwards to justify any behavior. Especially when you're in power, they seem to be able to justify any behavior. And having them monitor themselves, even the best cops that know, they get pressured into looking the other way and to justifying behavior that they know isn't right. you know, it shouldn't be that easy to kill somebody. I know they have a dangerous job, but they should go, every last-ditch effort should be applied before it happens. We shouldn't have this many mistakes. They're here to serve and protect. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Hi, Jacob Peden. Supervisor Gaspar, I appreciated your Workshop for Warriors program, and Staff Sergeant Fletcher, it's a pleasure to be in front of you again. I'm a disabled veteran. When I went through our training, we were taught that there are rules of engagement for enemy combatants, and those can vary. Right now, for my friend who is in Kandahar, Afghanistan, he has to be taking effective fire for his CH-47. This is a helicopter that if it goes down, you're probably going to die. And we have to be taking effective fire. Effective fire pretty much means you can hear the whiz of the bullets. For those of you who've watched movies, it's talked about all the time. That's how close it is. That's how risky it is. I'm not trying to trash our police department. What they have is an almost impossible job at times. So what I do appreciate, being somebody who's more in the middle, that we are trying to combine the two bills in front of us today. We need this. And we also need to restore faith in our police department. If this passes, I hope everybody here can give them a bit of a break, because what is happening right now is not working. And they should not have a more relaxed rule of engagement, which is only what I can go by, and I can only speak for myself, on our own citizens. These are not enemy combatants. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Marissa Martin Talbert. I live in San Diego County District 4, and I'm standing here representing myself and the Earl B. Gilliam Bar Association in support of AB 392. Reasonable use of force has not been working for the Black and Brown communities. AB 392 provides clear guidance for an alternative to ending human life. It allows for the right to self-defense, so it doesn't negate the safety of police officers. However, it accounts for the safety of all. You have already heard the statistics from the ACLU, and in the event that a viable alternative is available, this bill allows for accountability, and that accountability is still deferred to the district attorney, whether they're going to prosecute an officer or not. And prosecution does not mean conviction. So just the same way, you just heard from a disabled veteran. I myself am also a veteran, 9 years in the Navy, and I have been on multiple deployments, and I have had to shoot. I have had weapons release authority, and I know that if I do something wrong, misconduct, if I say go too soon, that I will be held accountable, and it should be the same for police officers. I have to worry, as an attorney, I have to worry about going out of the house with a hoodie on, because I'm going to be perceived as somebody that's threatening, more than likely, than any of you sitting up on this board. And I think you really need to, as everybody has urged you, reconsider, because I have had more trauma seeing members, Black and Brown, my Black and Brown brothers and sisters getting gunned down by police officers than I've ever had on any deployment I've ever served on. And that is a problem. That is a serious problem. So I urge you to support AB 392. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. My name is Elise Pipkin-Allen, and I'm a resident of the 4th District. Many people have said many things that I plan to say, so I'm going to change my presentation a little bit. The one thing I do know for sure is that Dr. Shirley Weber is a researcher. She's a data-driven person. When she doesn't take signing a bill or making a bill lightly. If she says this bill is the right bill, it's not her personal opinion. Just like it's your personal opinion that it's not, her opinion comes from the research that she has done. So you need to know that this bill has been well researched and well documented. Another thing that I do know is that I am the wife of a Black man. I am the mother of 2 Black sons. I am the grandmother of 4 Black sons. And what you want to do with this bill puts all of the black men in my life in danger. If something happens to any one of those black men now, you and you will be responsible for that. The 4 black men in my life, the 6 black men in my life are all good people. They go about their lives in a very ordinary way until they run into the police. You all do not have to teach your children how to act when they run into the police. I have to tell my grandsons, because they are still young, when a policeman stops you, put your hands on the wheel. Don't look him in the eye. If he wants your licenses or if he wants the car registration, tell him it's over there. May I reach for it? You have to change your whole life when you come into a cop, when you come into contact with a police officer, and none of you have to do that. So I tell you, you need to be careful. When you do this, you are giving the police more authority to kill more black and brown children. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, please.
As the next speaker is approaching the podium, I'll call forward 5 additional speakers: Jasreen Albagord, Jessica Dockstader, Wendy Wheatcroft, Colleen Cusack, and Arthur Scott.
Hi, my name is Alexis Renwans. I'm here from District 5. I support AB 392 because Black Lives Matter. A vote against AB 392 means you do not care about Black, Brown, and Native lives. I am tired of the endless excuses for why the Black woman had to die over a cigarette break, or why the Black guy didn't survive what wouldn't even have been a police interaction with my white father. Diane Jacobs, your opening statement contained no expression or evidence of interest in Black, Brown, and Native lives. You talked about divisiveness without mentioning any of the communities burying family members who died at the hands of police. In this way, you have already divided yourself away from those communities who will die because you aren't interested in becoming racially literate. You are discarding Black, Brown, and Native lives like they are nothing to you. I call on you all to reject the resolution written by my district supervisor, Jim Desmond. We need officers to be experts at de-escalation. We need public accountability for police who take lives. We need AB 392. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, please.
Hello, my name is Jasreen Abelgard. I'm from District 5. I'm a multi-ethnic woman. I was raised by a white family, but I lived in a predominantly Mexican and Black neighborhood. There are definite differences in how children are prepared to deal with the cops. I got training from my white mother that she didn't give any of her other children who were all white. And I asked her why, and she said, because unfortunately, this world will not accept you the way you are, even though you are beautiful. So I've seen firsthand the discrepancies and the racial profiling of the neighborhoods that I've grown up in. I've also had the privilege to now live in a more upper middle class, and I can tell you, in the 2 years I've lived there, I've not seen one cop, as opposed to when I was raised in a low-income Black and brown neighborhood. It's literally the safest place, some would say, because 1 second you could see a cop. Every second there's a cop just driving by. I feel like being multi-ethnic, I've seen multiple sides of this, and I would just urge you to consider that honesty and accountability should be held by police as well as citizens. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next, please.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Jessica Dockstader, and I'm a resident of District 3. I'd like to begin by saying that I think the comment made by Chairwoman Jacob commenting on the divisive nature of 392 was not only unhelpful to this hearing today, but already reveals significant bias and makes me wonder how open-minded you all remain while hearing the public testimony today. However, I digress. I'd like to thank you for this opportunity to speak. As previously stated, SB 230 was recently amended in the Senate committee and is now contingent on the passage of AB 392. Linking the bills together was done to ensure the two groups with competing bills would continue their conversations and negotiations with each other. That's why I see today's resolution as hasty, unnecessary, and counterproductive. Opposing AB 392 not only ignores the community's cries for increased accountability, but it would deprive law enforcement of training they specifically have asked for, and this resolution seems to be nothing else but polarizing and actively impeding in the sensitive negotiation process that the two groups are engaged in. Furthermore, it is not beyond me that the effects of this bill would not have a large effect on the demographic of the Board of Supervisors. The individuals speaking today, imploring you to not oppose 392, are the ones who are over-policed and are impacted by this bill. You say that action shouldn't be taken in Sacramento without input in San Diego, from San Diego, but what is the use of input by this board if it doesn't represent the will of the community? As leaders in this community, please consider this prior to making what seems like an out-of-touch and uninformed decision. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Hi, my name's Wendy Wheatcroft. I'm a lifelong San Diegan. I live in District 2, and I'm a leader with Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America. We're a national gun violence prevention organization, and we aim to prevent gun violence in all its forms, including police violence. California Moms supports AB 392 because the conversation about gun violence is incomplete without talking about police use of force. And we do our Black and brown communities a huge disservice when we leave that out of the conversation when we're talking about gun violence. We support modern use of force policies and laws that discourage lethal force and encourage de-escalation. Use of force policies reduce police shootings while having no negative impact on crime or harm to police. I will tell you that guns are the leading cause of death for Black and brown children in America right now, and there is no such thing as other people's children. It is time for white San Diego and California leadership to listen to, believe, and center Black and brown humans and their lives. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Arthur Scott, and I am an active duty law enforcement officer. I've been serving for the last 23 years. In fact, I've been up since 9 o'clock last night and came right here after court. So I'm here to encourage you to withhold your vote today until we get more information, as Assemblymember Dr. Weber has said. As I said, I've been in law enforcement since I was 24 years of age. And with any changes that come, law enforcement officers are often resistant to change. When the body-worn camera was discussed about being introduced into our profession, there was fear and these exaggerated things stated that would suggest that law enforcement wasn't going to be able to do their job properly. We already practice de-escalation. There's examples of it. It just depends on who the person that's being de-escalated against. We had an individual in Mission Bay a few years back who actually waved a gun at a police helicopter and several police officers and advanced on them, and then was only shot one time. To the other extreme, the gentleman earlier mentioned about the young rapper who, he didn't mention the part about had a gun in his vehicle. However, there was time to control that situation. His vehicle was blocked in. There was other measures that could have been taken rather than 6 officers standing around him with only one tool, which was their firearm. There was no other danger. They could have, the time is is on the side of law enforcement at that point. There's another example in Florida where there was a mayor who was having a search warrant served on his home. He fired 2 rounds at a SWAT team. They didn't fire one shot back. Instead, they backed out, surrounded the house, and waited that individual out. No one's saying that law enforcement officers cannot immediately defend themselves if a gun is pointed at them, and that's their only option. But when there are opportunities to de-escalate and use less lethal measures, we should take those opportunities.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Next speaker, please.
As the next speaker is approaching the podium, I'll call forward 5 additional speakers: Diana Ayala, Mark Stutzman, Vicky White, Jeffrey Karahamuheto, and Kim Moore.
If men were angels, no government would be necessary. If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary. In framing a government which is to be administered by men over men, the great difficulty lies in this. You must first enable the government to control the governed,
Ma'am?
and in the next place oblige it to control itself.
Ma'am, if you could
James-
please state your name for the audio record.
I will. My name is Colleen Cusack. I'm a criminal defense attorney for 26 years. I'm a criminal policy advocate, and I teach police officers. I've been teaching police officers for 16 years at the undergraduate level at University of Phoenix. You have the opportunity by supporting AB 392 to achieve James Madison's aspiration. But by opposing AB 932, you are abdicating your job as a governing body, failing to control the governed, and failing in your obligation to control the police. As to the reasonable and necessary standard, it is unreasonable to kill somebody when it is unnecessary. There is no reason to split these distinctions. As for second-guessing the police, that happens in every single criminal case. That's the job they signed up for, and that's what the Constitution requires. We deter people from committing crimes and wrongdoing by imposing consequences. By opposing AB 392, you are taking away those consequences, and you are giving police no deterrence to committing mistakes. Training of the police is useless if you're training them that as long as they say they made a mistake, there are no consequences. That as long as they say they were afraid, they don't have to suffer the same consequences that you or I do when we are afraid and we are at our door and we are defending ourselves for our lives. You are not protecting the police. You are taking away their trust and accountability, and this makes them more vulnerable in the community.
Thank you.
You're on the wrong side of history.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, members of the board. My name is Mark Stutzman. I live in Brookside Community in North Escondido in District 3. I was a civil attorney for 10 years before switching over to transactional work. I practiced in corporate formation and finance the last 20 years as a general counsel for 10 years of a diversified financial service company that had 8 subsidiaries, including, among other things, a security broker-dealer. So I give you my experience to reflect my consideration, my study of, and deep appreciation for the rule of law, and for lawmakers who see lawmaking as an instrument for making our union more perfect. So I ask you to consider the results of a law we have had on our books since 1872, the results of a Reconstruction-era statute. You've heard some of the statistics. I think we could say those statistics 172 times, and the import of the impact it's having on our communities could not be made enough. So I'm going to repeat a few of them. 2015 report found that police in Kern County killed more people per capita than any other county in the U.S. In 2017, 172 people were killed by peace officers of California. Half of them didn't have guns. Of the unarmed people, the police killed 3 out of 4 were people of color. Black people in California, according to 2017 statistics, were 3.2 times more likely to be killed by police than white people. Of the 15 police departments with the highest per capita rates of police killings in the nation, 5, that's 1 in 3 of those cities, not 1 in 50, are in California. I give you the name, but I'm out of time. So let's compare the results in communities that have adopted best practices to better preserve precious lives. Under President Obama, the U.S. Department of Justice helped cities like San Francisco and Seattle adopt policies that excuse me, I'm out of time. But I think the results of the current law are just unconscionable, and it's a form of intellectual bankruptcy to think these results flow from a just law.
Thank you, sir. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Jeffrey Alonzo Caraja Mujeto. I'm a San Diego native. I'm an organizer with the San Diego Organizing Project, and my job, passion, and just like what keeps me going is connecting with folks of various colors, classes, and creeds to see what our communities need to make those changes. I think the main thing on my mind right now is, why is the board wasting time on voting on a resolution you have no power over? I met with many of your staff even last week and department heads, and there are major issues in our county that we can fix. San Diego County has real issues, and a $2 billion rainy day fund. It's raining right now. We can see a lot of folks that care about our community are here, and we would much rather be looking at the budget, right, that's soon to drop, and be focusing on things that are in our control. The fact that financial aspects of this, of AB 392, are being used as an excuse to push a racist agenda is problematic. As the speaker just said prior to me, some of this hasn't been updated since 1872, right? 1872. I'm from a biracial family, and when they ask me, right, what do the people in power believe? What do our electeds believe? It's very difficult for me to say that at the core this is not racism, right? We feel left out. We feel as if when decisions are made, the only thing that matters are numbers, right? And when I say numbers, I mean votes and money. Why are we here today? What are you really representing? What is the San Diego that you are trying to create? I understand some of you are soon to term out. Some of you are not going to be in your seat too much longer. What world are you creating for the next person to sit in that position? Even if in the past you made decisions that don't reflect what you're going to make today, you can change those. David Flores Ramos, William Crawford, Henry Lane, Anthony Santana, Daniel Ramirez, Alfonso Cervantes, Daniel Lang, Deshaun Brown, Charles Ballard, Sakorm Han, Stephanie Cures, Brenda Mendoza, Daniel Mesmar, Javier Morales, Mark Moraski, Jonathan Mathis, Bhavana Ivan Vong, Willabo McCoy, Aaron Pogzeski, Nolan Herzig, Michael Novak,
Sir.
Isaiah Thomas. These are all lives that have been taken in 2019 in California alone. Why are we still having these conversations? The fact that I read things in history books and I see it even more in my everyday life is problematic. Like the pain coursing through our body today is not normal. We should not be living on this. We have things around us that we could be focusing on. Why do we continue to have conversations that have been happening for centuries?
Sir,
this
please,
is disgusting.
Please
no,
wind
please
up.
hear us. We're hurting.
We have 14 more speakers.
And they're going to say the same thing as me. Why are we here? Why are we here?
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. But I would also ask the speakers to respect the time limit so everybody has a chance to be heard. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Kim Moore with UDW, and I want to share that the Ruderman Family Foundation completed a study in 2015 that found that nearly 1/3 to a half of all people killed by police are people with mental illness and disabilities. That is the population that our members at UDW provide care for, which is why we are co-sponsors of AB 392, because we see the clear intersection between police violence and disabilities and mental illness. Law enforcement has murdered people who are in the midst of mental health crises, and that is unacceptable. The current reasonable force standard is the oldest unamended statute of its kind anywhere in this nation. It hasn't been updated since 1872. Several jurisdictions have implemented a necessity standard, and the sky didn't fall, the world didn't end, there wasn't mass chaos. In fact, jurisdictions that implemented this necessity standard report that incidences of use of force has significantly decreased, and there were no increased incidences of violence against police officers. So this is a false narrative. That is the cop killer bill. That is a blatant lie, and we wholly reject that narrative. We reject statements that say that this is an impossible standard. That is lazy reasoning and is intellectually and factually dishonest. If other law enforcement agencies have implemented this in other jurisdictions for several years now, that makes it very clear that it is not impossible and it can be implemented here statewide as law. The truth is that you just don't want it to be. I would also remind everyone in this room, especially the Board of Supervisors, that the necessity standard in AB 392 came from recommendations from the highest law enforcement agencies in this nation. Additionally, there's this fear around the potential for police to be held accountable if it becomes law and they violate it. To that, I would say as public servants, why on earth would you ever be okay with law enforcement to be able to kill your unarmed constituents with impunity? The only people who wouldn't want an archaic standard updated are people who oppose AB 392, who are folks who have no regard for black bodies or people of color and those with disabilities and mental illness. These are your constituents. They're the ones who you ignore every single day until we show up in the streets raising hell because they have been killed by police officers.
Thank you, ma'am.
I would urge you to not oppose this, but if you do, we'll remember it when you're up for re-election.
Thank you. Thank you. Next speaker, please.
As the next speaker is approaching the podium, I'll call forward 5 additional speakers: Clovis Honore, Lori Thiel, Mitchell Woodson, Kovu Allen, and Ismahan Abdullahi.
Good afternoon. My name is Vicki White. I'm a resident of District 2 in Mission Hills, District 4. I don't want to repeat what anyone has said here. Part of the things I'm learning as a white person, learning about racism, is to listen to black and brown people. So please, listen to them. They are telling you that this use of force standard is not working. We see the evidence around us every day when white people are treated differently than brown and black people. Why is it that the shooter in South Carolina can get arrested without use of force after killing nine people in a church, 9 black people in a church, and yet Alfred Alongo, who's having a mental health crisis with a vape pen in his hand, gets shot by El Cajon police officers? That is just laziness, and that is why people are bringing forward AB 392, and it is irresponsible of you to empathize with police officers while not empathizing with the people who are being killed. 172 people in 2017. That is ridiculous. And it is ridiculous for you to sit here and not look at yourself. Why are you emphasizing with police officers over the people here? Is it because you think that there's something wrong with them, that they're not truthful? You need to examine yourselves. You do not need to take action on this action today. It is a recommendation to the state only. And I ask you to not take any action today, because if you do, we will see right through it. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Next.
Good afternoon. My name is Michelle Woodson, and I was born and raised in San Diego, a resident of District 1, and I am the supervising criminal defense attorney for Think Dignity, a local homeless advocacy agency here in San Diego. Yet my most important role is a mother. I am a mother to 2 beautiful black children. When my daughter was just 6 years old, she was playing in a playground with a little girl when the little girl's mother pulled her daughter away from mine because she said, and I quote, "because she is a bad person because of the color of her skin." Communities that do not look like us continue to perpetuate the idea that black and brown communities pose a danger simply because of the color of their skin. Because of this, I must have conscious conversations about the social injustices I will never be able to protect my children from. I must spend time speaking intentionally about the dangers of living in our community with their brown skin. I'm angry with the knowledge that no matter the amount of degrees I have obtained and the safe home I'm able to provide, I cannot shield them from the systematic racism that inherently exists in our police departments. My heart aches knowing that regardless of how many thoughtful conversations I have with them, I cannot shield them from the fact that in the state that we've always called home, more people are killed by officers than in any other state in the nation, and that the people that are killed almost always look like them. It can bring me to my knees knowing that no matter how many times I remind them of the beauty of their skin, they are 3.2 times more likely to be killed by police than their white counterparts, even when they are unarmed and pose no threat of deadly force. As any other parent, I've spent my life aiming to provide my children with everything a child deserves: love, health, safety, and a community that values their lives. AB 392 provides a clear and common sense standard that requires officers to use deadly force only when necessary to protect against imminent threat to their lives of the officers and the lives of others. I'm asking that you reject this resolution that undermines AB 392 and opposes saving lives in our communities and improving officer safety. Simply stated, I'm asking you to let us live.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
I'm Lori Thiel, President, League of Women Voters of San Diego. The League is a 100-year-old nonpartisan political organization, and I'm here today in support of AB 392.
As you know, this bill would authorize law enforcement to use deadly force only when necessary to prevent imminent death or serious bodily injury and hold officers accountable for the use of deadly force when there are no alternatives or when there are alternatives. The bill specifies that officers can always invoke the self-defense law that applies to the public. The League of Women Voters supports violence prevention programs in all communities, the active role of government and social institutions in preventing violent behavior, and the allocation of public monies in government programs to prevent violence. AB 392 will preserve human lives for both the public and officers. Community trust in law enforcement is undermined when force is used unnecessarily and disproportionately. We believe changing the standard for the use of force from reasonable to necessary will reduce police and community violence, rebuild the community trust, and bring state law enforcement policies on use of force in compliance with recent court decisions and national best practices. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Clovis Honore. I am a resident of District 1. For 30 years, I was in District 4. Nathan, you're too late, but I love Brother Cox anyways. Thank you, board members and friends and loved ones. We do love you, and we do love our police officers. I'm also, by the way, the president of the San Diego branch of the NAACP, in case you didn't catch that. And we are a 110-year-old civil rights organization. Life is very short. And there's no time for fussing and fighting, my friend. I have always thought that it's a crime to kill an unarmed man, to shoot a man in the back while he's running away, to kill a 12-year-old boy, to kill a man sleeping in his car. So I will ask you once again, try to see it my way. Only time will tell if I am right or I am wrong. While you see it your way, there's a chance we may fall apart before too long. We can work it out. The privileged and the powerful often see things differently than those who suffer from the oppression of the system that gives privilege to the privileged. You see it your way. This is law and order. In a democracy, we believe that the voices of the less privileged should weigh as much as those of the privileged. We see it our way. These are our children, brothers, sisters, fathers, mothers, being gunned down in the street by those sworn to protect and serve not just the privileged, all of us. The next time a California police officer guns down an unarmed California American citizen, some of that blood may be on your hands. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Hi, I'm Kovu, 10-year veteran. All the other titles don't matter. Deadly force is serious bodily harm or death. A lot of speakers have been talking about the fatal shootings. I've been hearing a lot about the non-fatal shootings. And that's what the bill is about. It's not just those that are died, it's those that are being maimed, who can't go to work, who can't continue on their life before having these interactions with police. Something to think about. So the third thing I want to talk about, or the second thing I want to talk about, is the use of force training that they have, that the police officers have. Why not make it public? If it is something that is not made public, how can we understand what their intentions are when meeting us? Third thing, you talked about veterans and jobs. A third of the police officer population is veterans. Of those veterans, most of them are going to war. So they're familiar with the Geneva Code. They're familiar with the Common too. And it states how to deal with armed assailants. Have them train the other officers. Because if you can have an entire military force who cannot readily identify their combatants because they don't have a uniform, and they can make it home, and their friends can make it home, and we don't go on killing those who shouldn't be killed, then certainly we can do that with our police force that has a third of veterans in it. The other point, I know I'm looking at this time. The other point, a lot of people came up here and talked to you about race. The National Geographic released an article about what America will look like in 2050. Please look it up. And by 2050, people of my shade will be very scarce. So will yours. That's because most people will be biracial. So if we don't put an emphasis on the protecting of communities that don't look like us, by the time your grandkids have grandkids, there'll be those who are under the boot. Got 9 seconds left on here. So I'm not really going to read the rest of this. All I will say is that I do not know all of you. I do now. And just like everyone who may have never been here before, They are going to look at these names. Some of you are up for re-election. I'm about to get out the military. Hate to have to buy a house in your district and run.
Thank you. Thank you. Next speaker, please.
As the next speaker is approaching the podium, I'll call forward the final speakers in opposition: Michael Alston, Lisa Baggett, Tony Abuka, Armand King, Abor Rahin Hamil, and Huford Mohammed.
Good afternoon. My name is Ismahan Abdullahi, and I am the Executive Director of Mass PACE, the Muslim American Society's Public Affairs and Civic Engagement. And I really just want to reiterate what everyone else in this room has said. I'm here today to urge all of you to save lives by supporting AB 392. And I want to tell you a story. About a decade ago, my brother went to a local convenience store to buy something for us. And on his way there, he was stopped by an officer who claimed that he fit the description of a black teen that they were looking for. Keep in mind that my brother was a valedictorian. Keep in mind that my brother is attending now one of the top medical schools in the United States. But our family was rattled by that experience. The officer let him go because he realized he really didn't fit the description other than being just another black teen. And the reality is that trauma and that fear is what a lot of our communities are living with, especially for communities who are dealing with multiple trauma, multiple, issues. And the reality is we don't want to be left behind with the what ifs. A decade later, even if he's in medical school, when we were seeing him off, the fact that I'm still thinking about that incident and teaching him, hey, if anything happens, this is what you do. This is how you're going to react. And making sure, not even talking about medical school and that experience and saying, you know what, you got that figured out. But let's talk about society and how they see you. And the reality is, my brother could have been a statistic, like so many others here in California and across the nation. And when we're asking that you support AB 392, we're saying that we don't want our communities, our brothers and our sisters to continue to be statistics. We want to make sure that the impacted communities that you are all serving, that you are hearing their voice, because those who are closest to the pain are the closest to the solution. And when we think about AB 392, it really is common sense, because it gives Black and brown communities a fighting chance to be seen as humans, to be dignified, and a fighting chance at life. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, please.
Hello, my name is Armand King, and I support AB 392, and 100% of everybody that talked before me and supported 392, I am with them, and no need to repeat what they're saying, but I'm just going to tell you what it looks like from that side and what it feels like, and I'm watching a lot of people that are active in the community, helping the community, and it seems borderline like we're begging people to live, and it hurts me like, why are we to this point where we're begging to live? I feel like I represent San Diego, born and raised in San Diego, 37 years, and I'm looking at a board and people that probably have great hearts. I don't know you individually, but I don't see not one representation of me. Put yourself in my shoes and people like me that are looking out to a board and see no representation. This isn't San Diego that I'm looking at. So for one, everybody said all the good stuff to you. Community, organized, we know who's coming up for re-election, and we need to start vetting people to get in here. It's not their fault, it's our fault, okay? Let's get our people ready to get in office so we're not begging people to understand our hurt. I'm not begging anybody anymore. Start working for our future, you guys, not them. So I don't expect them to vote on our behalf. That's not us.
Thank you, sir. Next speaker, please. Next speaker, please.
My name is Michael Alston, born in Baltimore, been in San Diego 35 years. I work as an engineer. Our nation looks to California for leadership, especially at this time with who's in the White House. California has the largest number of shootings of unarmed citizens. We need to address this. It's very clear something needs to be done. Shirley Weber has done the research. She has a very, very good proposal. The spirit of that proposal has been tested in other jurisdictions, and it's worked. It's working. Let's consider it. Let's use it. During the past two meetings of the University City Democratic Club, we meet at the library in North UC. This bill was discussed a month ago and then last week. The racial composition of the room is overwhelmingly white, okay? I want you to consider how they voted. Anyone care to guess what the vote was on this bill? 27-1 in favor of this bill, okay? That's my community. I've lived there for over 20 years. The grassroots, the people who work and live and breathe and watch TV every night and see what's going on with the black community, they get it. They understand. They understand. Something has to be done. And this bill is quite reasonable in what it wants to do. I think you know it too, deep down, each of you. But for some reason, you get on a board like this and other things come into play. You start leaning. I've heard it called lean to the green, right? And not environmental stuff, but there's something that's swaying. And also a group of people working together, you get a kind of a pack mentality. You look this way, you look the way. Policemen do the same thing. They're going to do what the other guys are doing because everyone wants to fit in. But do the right thing. Look in your heart. Do the right thing. You don't have to vote on this bill right now. Take more input. Think about it.
Thank you, sir. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon. My name's Lisa Baggett, District 5. I'm a member of Stand Up Scripps Ranch and Indivisible. I'm also here to support John Way, who made some very good points this afternoon regarding the fact that we need necessary use of force, not the reasonable use of force. I am a person who was born and raised in the San Francisco Bay Area to a grandfather, an uncle, a cousin, and a partner who were all police officers. They every day went into the line of fire, and never once did they have to raise up a gun and kill someone, and they lived in the killing streets there. So this is not reasonable to think that we have to have this kind of acts going on in our community. And these two bills, 230 and 392, are the answer to combine those two things to bring us true solutions to solving some of these problems. And then, and only then, can we move on to the real underlying issues, which are having sensible gun control. It is guns that are killing people. And so we need to look at that. At this point in time, we live in a very dangerous situation. We have a hateful and bigoted presidential regime in power right now. It is up to us at the ground level to make change, and you are the people who are on first line for us here locally. So I hope that you will look at this and try and not have blood on your hands and make the necessary changes that need to be done to protect all of our citizens. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, please.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you. My name is Tony Abuka, the brother of Alfred Olengo, and also the president of the Alfred Olengo Foundation. Alfred Olengo was killed September 27th, 2016 on a Tuesday afternoon, somewhat like this today. I was leaving campus after school and I got a call from my niece who's here with me today, and she informed me that my older brother was killed. He was shot. She told me exactly where, so I immediately headed straight to the scene. At the time of arrival, I discovered that it was actually a police officer who was the one who had shot my brother. I had to pick my sister up, Lucy Olengo, who witnessed her brother killed just feet away from her. When she was the one who placed the call with the understanding, he was going through an emotional breakdown because his best friend committed suicide a week prior. She's a trained professional and works at a facility which deals with people who are going through mental breakdowns and those situations. She understood that she just needed a trained professional to come and de-escalate the situation, talk to him, and also bring the level down of the emotions he was feeling. She placed a 5150 call. She placed 3 calls in a time span of an hour. At that time, she was informed that it was not a priority to come and address the situation. After an hour, officers arrived, and within 50 seconds, my brother was killed, simultaneously tased and shot down at close range. With the understanding, my sister informed he had no weapon, and it was also understood that he was no harm to himself or anyone else. The objective was to just bring him down to a level where he can feel comfortable. The last words my brother had ever told me, I spoke to him the night before this situation. He told me nothing else ever feels the same anymore. Those are the last words I ever heard from my brother. I feel the exact same way since I had to watch them killed. In order for you to understand how important these situations are, you have to understand you have to take yourself out of your own shoes.
Thank you, sir.
You have to put yourself in the position of the people who are getting killed. At close range, my brother was cornered, backed into a corner, and shot dead. I go to the place where he bled out, and I look and I stand there as motivation because I understand he didn't deserve to die that day. And if you, any of you, were to understand that was your family member, and you have to live the rest of your life with that on your hands, you understand why and how important this is to all of us sitting here.
Thank you, sir.
Also, we are in support here with Reverend Shane Harris, the People Alliance to Justice. He supports AB 392.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Abdul Rahim Hamid, and I'm here speaking in behalf of my deceased grandfather, a grandfather I never met, only hear stories about it. And there are people in this audience that have relatives that have died, and they'll never know. You know, I want to close our eyes for a minute, and all I see is human. I don't see color, I don't see shapes, I don't see sizes. But what happened in Escondido last weekend at the Jewish synagogue was a discrimination based on a person's ethnicity and their religion. And what happens today, every day in this country and in this city, we continue to perpetuate hatred and prejudice and bigotry. You have to change your stripes. I welcome the new additions to this council with Nathan Fletcher, Gaspar, and many others that have been about justice. And the day is a time that we have to really think, because we are thinking that this has become a thing about the police against blacks and browns. It is about humanity. It's about people standing up for justice and fairness and saving the lives. I think that the minimal ask is retraining. This is all about. But we're trying to turn it into a black and white confrontation and black and brown confrontation. Dear people, we're living in a time that you can change history. I was raised in Jim Crow. I know about sitting in the back of the bus and walking and stepping off the sidewalk. It's not too far. I'm not too far removed. My mother died at 102 years old just a few days ago. So we have to change things. If we really want to make America great again, let's make San Diego great. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Hello, everyone. My name is Yasmin Abaid. I'm a Muslim Palestinian. I'm here to speak on behalf of, or as part of the Muslim and Palestinian communities in both District 3 and 4, as I am in both of these. I would like to start by thanking you all for your time and commitment to our communities, as well as to your constituents. I'm here in support of AB 392. And to say that it is the bare minimum to request our police officers to follow the guidelines of AB 392. AB 392 is requesting the use of lethal force only when necessary, which is exactly what our police officers should be already doing. However, we all know and we have all seen that black and brown bodies continue to lose their lives every single day because this is not the case. Officers are trained to make split-second decisions. That is literally their jobs. So for us to say that we can't hold officers accountable to making split-second decisions is us saying that we can't hold officers accountable to doing their bare minimum job. AB 392 ensures that we minimize black and brown bodies to be future headlines. We can't wait for them to be dead in order for us to take action. We have to take action now to make sure that that doesn't happen, and we are actually protecting our communities. We are here today to remind you that your job is to represent all of us, every single one in this room and outside of this room, to vote on behalf of all of us, not just yourself and your communities or your own families. And that is why we are here today. And again, I want to thank you for your time and have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Hello, everyone. I didn't have intentions to come up here, but my heart said come up here. My name is Gina Burns. I live in District 4, and I support AB 392. My son, Bernard Graham, who is sitting in George Bailey now for a year, was shot a year ago in La Mesa. After 2 years, the last year intensively, for me trying to get help, desperately calling 911 and asking for the PERT team, and if they weren't available, they'd ask me, oh, we'll go. I said, no. They said, why? I don't want you killing my son. They shot my son not just once, but twice, and then tased him while he's there jerking around from the shots. But in the meantime, before this, going back 2 years and even prior to that, I've been out here screaming for help for the mentally ill. Get him help. So where do I go? Calling 211. I even called Neil Bessie to go to his office to ask for help, since he had gone to one of our meetings at NAMI and said, if you have a person with mental illness, call me. I'll help you guys. Where was he? I called him at least 10 times. Nowhere. We need action here. We need a solution. People are dying. All lives matter. My son's lives matter. And then now we're facing criminalization. When I've been asking for help, desperately, he suffers from bipolar. Most people self-medicate. Our community is traumatized. I'm tired of this. What are we going to do? And again, thank you for listening to me. And remember, these people's bloods is in everyone's hands. Please take that to heart, because it could be your family member one day. You never know. Hate is ugly. It's not the solution. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
My name is Student Minister Abdul Waliullah Muhammad, known as Huford Muhammad. Student Minister Huford Muhammad. I want to just go over three things. I'm in 100% support of AB 392 and everything that these wonderful men and women have said here today. I really want to come back to your opening, Ms. Jacobs, and how you started. And 3 points I want to make from what you said and who seconded the motion. We said we support a bill, the Supreme Court decision of 1872. I'm thinking about the Dred Scott decision, Plessy versus Ferguson, and so many other decisions that took place in the 1800s and the mindset that went into those. I want you to really think back. Are you any better than your grandfather, than your great-grandfathers? When we're thinking about the racism that exists in this city, this is not a charge, this is not an indictment, but I want us to really have a thought of consciousness to understand what the people that have come here before you have said. Dr. Weber did not craft a bill that is against police officers. As a matter of fact, we work well with police officers and we support good police officers. But when you can have people within the police department, within the sheriff department, within law enforcement that have a mindset that grows out of a bill of 1872, then we know we have those that have the mindset of the Ku Klux Klan, the Night Riders, and many who have victimized black and brown in this country. I want you to think. What is your mindset today? This is not to charge anybody on that board. Many have said when we look up here, we see predominantly, it's not predominantly Caucasian, it is all Caucasian. At the end of the day, do you feel our pain? Are you concerned with what those who represent every district here is saying to you today? And that which the best practices from law enforcement have given to you, and to be responsible. You should not make it us against the police officers. We're not against good police officers. We're not against seeing police officers do their job. We're against what's happening in the killing and the murder of black and brown because of their color. Give me 30 seconds. I'm going to say this to you.
Please wind up.
When we opened up, you said it was 2 minutes for everyone. But you used a decision based on what authority you had to give somebody 5 minutes. When the police officers are not restrained and they can use what they feel is reasonable as opposed to what is necessary, then they make decisions that you made arbitrarily, going against the very rule that you set when we started this particular reality.
Thank you. Thank you. I have to say that if I was going to be 100% fair to both sides, I would have given equal time to both sides, which I did not do. Next speaker, please.
Hello. Hi, I wasn't sure I was going to get called. Dr. Darwin Fishman, I filled out a card over 2 hours ago.
Let's make sure that we have the speaker slips in.
No.
Yeah, there were late speaker slips that were turned in. Normally I would not take them, but go ahead.
Okay. All right.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
And I'm here, part of Active San Diego Racial Justice Coalition, NAACP. But also, really, I want to come in and speak just real quickly. Since with what's referenced earlier about the sheriff's presentation, I was also a member of the CRB, the Community Review Board on Police Practices, and I was one of the few racial minorities that was on there. And the CLRB was used as a reference for the Sheriff's Department as a reason why to oppose this bill. I just want to point out, in case this is lost on anyone, this headline, Law Enforcement Review Board dismisses 22 in custody death cases. On a fundamental level, the checks and balances don't work. The people that are dying in custody the cases aren't being properly investigated by civilians. That part just falls through. I think it's really critical for this equation. I think the other thing too, from my experience, firsthand experience of reviewing complaints, is that the police always say that's necessary, and that there's also no police officers that are prosecuted for that make mistakes, or there are ones that are just not cut out to do the work and have other ulterior motives for use of force. And I think that at least with this bill, AB 392, you can have a higher standard for the policing and then set up the structure that needs to be in place, like training and like civilian oversight for these cases. And in that sense, this should be a pro-police bill in terms of AB 392. You should want this higher standard for police. And in that sense, you're the one that are being really way more divisive. We should all come together and support having quality police officers. Certainly, if you want community trust, and as you've heard from other officers, it makes a lot more sense if you have quality policing and that's properly rewarded and understood. We should be all on board, not, again, the divisive tactic of trying to support one bill and oppose the other. That doesn't make any sense at all. And it then questions what your real motives are for this, especially in terms of, for those of us that are on the receiving end of these police practices, where it makes a difference for us.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Amy Zamudio, and I'm from La Jolla. And actually, I was supposed to be in Montgomery, Alabama yesterday because we really support Brian Stevenson, who wrote Just Mercy, and the movie will be out in January. And yesterday in Montgomery, Alabama, we had a memorial for all of the people that were lynched in 1950. Okay? We had people lynched in 1950. And lynching really hasn't ended. It has evolved. And it's what we're seeing here today and what we're hearing from the community. 4 years ago, Freedon Rashawn Nahad was shot and killed within 33 seconds of his encounter with San Diego police. He was holding a pen. We remember him today and always. So us that are white, we don't understand this. I would ask all of you to investigate the Equal Justice Initiative. I was there last year for the memorial of the 4,500 souls that have been lynched in America. And yesterday, we added more from 1950. Please look at the Equal Justice Initiative. Do us all a favor. Go to Montgomery, Alabama. We as white people need to really pay attention to what's happening. It's not being made up. And we are the ones that are responsible. Thank you.
Thank you.
I would note that that concludes public testimony on this item. There were 10 individuals that registered their position in favor of the item but did not wish to address the board, and 21 individuals that registered their opposition but did not wish to address the board.
First, I'd like to thank everyone that took the time to come and to express your opinions and your views on what is before us today. It is our responsibility to weigh in on any state or federal piece of legislation that affects us, particularly on public safety issues. I've listened very intently to each one of you. I've learned from each one of you, and believe it or not, I get it. And all law enforcement officers are not perfect. But the intent of the legislation should be to basically support the job of law enforcement, but to hold law enforcement accountable for their actions. And also, and it was mentioned, and I think we can all agree on this based on what I've heard, is to focus on officer training. And that is in what I am proposing before the board today, Supervisor Desmond and I. And also the utilization of de-escalation techniques. And accountability was mentioned over and over and over. And we pride ourselves on accountability on this board and to hold others accountable. You need to hold us accountable, too. It's a very small percentage of police officers that do make mistakes. I would submit to you that in every profession throughout our country and our county, there are people who make mistakes. They must be held accountable, and that is the job of the officials that are responsible for them to do just that. There are, though, one thing I've learned, a lot of presentations, a lot of testimony in certain events that have taken place. I do know this, there are always two sides to every story. Let me tell you, in 2018, I have been very courteous and respectful to each of you. All I would ask is that you be respectful to members of this board as they express their opinions. I would ask the deputies to remove anyone who cannot sit and be respectful to members of the board who also have a right to speak and deliberate on this particular issue. The other side of the issue in 2018, and by the way, all lives matter. All lives matter. All lives should matter to everyone. In 2018, 144 law enforcement officers were killed in the line of duty in the United States. 52 of them were firearm related. Tomorrow, we will be honoring law enforcement here outside the County Administration Center for all law enforcement who died in the line of duty. Those officers who are often forgotten, unfortunately, and their families made the ultimate sacrifice. I'm now going to go to my colleagues. First, Vice Chairman Greg Cox.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to thank all the people that are here today for coming out and certainly expressing your thoughts and your concerns about this particular item. Let me start off by saying what I think we all know to be true, and that is law enforcement in today's age is the most dangerous and most highly scrutinized job you can have anywhere in the world. We count on men and women in the law enforcement community to make life-altering decisions in a split second. While most of us sleep safely at night in our beds, our law enforcement officers are placing their lives literally at risk, dealing with people and situations that most of us would probably run away from. That's why many years ago, I was honored to work with former Supervisor Ron Roberts to create the Law Enforcement Memorial that's just outside here in the Waterfront Park. And tomorrow, as was pointed out by Chair Jacob, with a heavy heart, we're going to pay tribute to those men and women of law enforcement in our region and across the state who paid the ultimate sacrifice to protect us. But it's also true that many in the community do not have full trust in law enforcement and are brokenhearted by deaths of young people and those suffering from mental illness. Many wonder why police can't first try to de-escalate a troubling situation and avoid the worst terrible outcomes. We may never completely bridge the chasm that exists of distrust between some in the community and law enforcement, but we have to try. We've had 2 items on the agenda today, one this morning and one this afternoon, that have really been very divisive. And you know, we live in an era where it seems like everything is a touchstone issue, where too many things are dividing this country and this community on one side or the other. And I know for a lot of people, compromise seems to be a bad word. Well, I don't think it's a bad word. I think it's the only way you ever make any progress moving forward. To that end, I support the efforts to bring law enforcement training up to standards and to rethink how law enforcement responds to dangerous situations. There is no weakness in looking at how we are doing things and seeing if there's a better way. Certainly, clearly, there is a need for more training, more funding for training. I'm glad to see that that's included in the recommendations that have been brought forward. And certainly there's a need for improvement on strategies to reduce the use of force. I certainly don't claim to be an expert on law enforcement, but I think we can all agree that the use of force is and should remain an option to law enforcement officers who come upon a dangerous, untenable situation that threatens their lives or those of innocent bystanders. This is about whether use of force should be the immediate response or whether we can train and educate officers to make it the last response. No officer, and I firmly believe this, no officer wants to shoot someone without having tried every possible measure to end a situation peacefully. And no one wants officers to die or be injured in the line of duty because they are worried about how their actions will be judged. It's my understanding that SB 230 has been linked now to AB 392, and that legislators are working to draft a bill that addresses everyone's concerns. I'm encouraged by this. As has been pointed out by a couple of people, I think the parties are getting together to see if they can come to some resolution of the differences between both of those bills as they were originally introduced. Because of that, I really believe it's premature to take a position on 392. There are very smart people on both sides of this issue and this debate, and I believe we ought to allow the legislators and the parties involved to craft a workable alternative. It's for that reason that I will be voting against the motion that is before us right now.
Thank you. Supervisor Fletcher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This issue is an important one, and it's one that I had been in agreement with Dr. Weber. Dr. Weber asked us to just hold off. She asked us to wait a bit. When this item was initially docketed about a week ago, it has substantially changed from that point with the 2 bills. Right now, they had negotiations today, so we don't even know what the current status of it is. And Dr. Weber had asked we wait, but it is certainly the prerogative and the choice of those who brought this forward today, and I respect that choice, and that is within their power. And I think it's a good conversation. I think it's one that we should have. I think it's one we should have more often. I think there's a lot of voices that have been heard today that historically haven't been heard in this forum and in this place. And I think we're all in agreement that law enforcement is an incredibly difficult job. It is hard. I am a supporter of those who put their life on the line, who go to work every day to protect us all. I've never been a member of law enforcement, but as a United States Marine Corps combat veteran, I know what it's like to go into dangerous situations. to fear for your life. It is not a career for the faint of heart. But supporting law enforcement means that we have to examine and put in place the best policies to make them successful in the desire to protect and to serve. Even broader than the impact or implications for law enforcement as a society, we must constantly search for more efficient, more effective, more update policies that take into account the realities of the world we live in. We talk about being a more perfect union. That's an aspirational statement. We're on a path to become a more perfect union. And we have to do that every day. I think that a lot of the issues that we hear before us today are broader and bigger than just a use of force policy. I don't think as a society and a country we have ever reconciled or addressed the original sin baked into the founding of our country. And I think today's discussion is about one aspect of that. But the reality is, if we're going to be honest about the public policy decision before us, we have to be honest about issues that are larger than law enforcement, because law enforcement deals with the impact and effect of the entire society. We're seeing a fundamentally different conversation today about treatment for those that are addicted. Fundamentally different. There is almost universal agreement that those suffering from addiction, they need treatment and they're sick. And the simple reality is that's because the opioid crisis hit white people. But it is, and it's not meant to be a divisive statement, but that's the reality. Because decades ago,
Please, Supervisor, let's wait a minute. Please, out of respect for the supervisor, could you please restrain yourselves? Supervisor Fletcher,
Yes,
I know it's hard, but please.
But decades ago, we had an addiction crisis. And the answer proposed was 3 strikes and was lock them up. And today we have an addiction crisis. And the answer, and it's the right answer today is right. We should provide treatment. These are folks who are ill and they need help. But we should just be honest about the underlying basis of why those two are looked at differently. You know, when you look at the disparity, crack and cocaine are the same drug. It's the same drug. But yet, for the longest time in our country, the exact same amount of crack got you 100 times longer sentence than the exact same amount of powder cocaine. And we know the reality of why that was. Because white people use powder cocaine. And people of color were using crack. And the federal government recognized that. And they said, that's not right. That's not equitable. That's not fair. That's not a more perfect union. And so they changed the federal sentencing guidelines. So now it's about 20 to 1. It's not 100 to 1. But it's better. It's not 1 to 1, but it's better. But it's not just issues in public safety. We talk about air quality issues. A child in Barrio Logan is 8 times more likely to have asthma than a child in La Jolla. Now, if it was the inverse, we would spend more time talking about air quality. That's just a fact. If Carmel Valley had 8 times higher asthma rates than Barrio Logan, we would spend more time talking about that. And I think these issues, they go deeper than that. When I was in the private sector, a dear friend of mine, Howard Wright, we got on the plane, we were traveling in business class, and we walk on, and someone asked him, are you a basketball player? Are you a professional basketball player? And he said, no, I'm a senior vice president at my company. And I said, Howard, do you get that a lot? And he said, I get it every time I get in business class. Because how could a black man be in business class if he wasn't an athlete? I see it with my wife. My wife and I will go to dinner with people that I've known my whole life. And the first question they ask her is, where did you go to school? And I say, well, you've never asked me that, ever. Why would you ask her that? Because she's a woman of color and she has to prove that she belongs. And it's uncomfortable and we don't like talking about these things. But in America, African American men are 6.5% of the population, unless it's in prison, and then it's 40%. And we see the legacies of redlining that continues to pervade our land use issues. And, you know, in each of these instances, not everyone making that is a racist and has evil in their heart, but there's an implicit bias that is baked into every decision we make. And when we don't confront these realities, and when we're not honest about the situations, and we don't think what are things we can do to improve our state of mind, then we're inconsistent with that desire to be a more perfect union. And I'll be honest, I don't know. I don't understand a lot of the struggles I heard, because it doesn't happen to me. But I hear you, and I know it's real. I live in a mixed-race house. I have a black daughter. Her life is fundamentally different than my white boys. And I see that, and I know that. And I don't discount that. I give great credence to that. And so I think we have to all be willing to examine the situations and the facts in front of us. And when we look at a policy choice as a statement of values, is it okay every 150 years to revisit a policy? A policy that was put in place when California was the Wild West. A policy that was put in place when women couldn't vote. A policy put in place almost 100 years before African Americans could vote. And when we look at that, I think we have to look at the realities of the current situation. And I do not believe that there is a single peace officer, not a single one, that goes to work and says, today I'm going to kill an unarmed person. I don't believe that's true. I don't believe there's a single officer who goes to work and says, today I'm going to shoot a person of color. I don't believe that. But I believe that we have broader societal problems that get baked into our existence and our way of being, and I think we have to examine those, and we have to say, is there a better way? It's been mentioned, the 2017 report from the Department of Justice, where 3/4 of those who were shot were people of color. It's not 3/4 of felonies, it's not 3/4 of the population. We know that black people are 3 times as likely to be shot than white people. We know that 3/4 of those who were unarmed were people of color. We've heard from parents who have to have different conversations with their children than others do about the reality of the situation and about what we're going through. We also know that we can do better. And we know this not because what's being proposed is experimental or revolutionary. We know this because there's other jurisdictions that have done things very similar. We know officer-involved shootings, 151 from 2015 to 2017, and went down in 2018. That's good. I think the awareness of these issues is good. But our current standard is police can use deadly force whenever an objectively reasonable officer would have done so under the circumstances, regardless of whether there was an immediate threat to life or bodily security or whether there were available alternatives. Under the current standard, these actions can only be viewed with the information the officer had at the time. The proposed standard in AB 392 authorizes police officers to use deadly force only when it is necessary to prevent imminent and serious bodily injury or death, that if given the totality of circumstance there was no reasonable alternative to use deadly force, including warnings, verbal persuasion, and other non-lethal methods, these actions can also only be considered with the information the officer had at the time. Under AB 392, you don't get the benefit of hindsight. The hang-up that we're stuck on here is necessary versus reasonable. And I spent time on this bill. I looked at what has happened in other areas. Illinois has adopted a standard that includes the words necessary. Adjusted for their smaller state population, they have less than half of the amount of shootings as we do. New York uses the term necessary. Adjusted for a smaller state population, they had 22% of the number of shootings that California did. Connecticut uses the word necessary. Adjusted for their smaller state population, they had 24% of the shootings we had. Philadelphia changed the standard to one when no alternative exists. After the policy was adopted, shootings dropped 67% within 1 year and remained at the lower rate moving forward. Closer to home, San Francisco changed its use of force standard, again using the word necessary. And in 2016, 1 year after the new regulation took place, the city reported a 20% decline in use of force instances. Lieutenant Mario Molina with the San Francisco Police Department stated, "We have seen a decrease in the use of force. We have a decrease in officers getting hurt." Stockton Police Department adopted something similarly consistent with this effort. They went from 11 shootings in 2015-2016 to 3 shootings in 2017-2018. Seattle updated its use of force policy, again utilizing necessary, and has steadily experienced extraordinarily low rates of incidents. In Seattle, de-escalation tactics have improved officer safety. A study in Seattle showed no increase in officer injury and showed that as more force was used, officers became injured. Chicago changed to a standard that included the use of the word necessary, and last year a report showed after the policy change, complaints against officers were down, officer-involved shootings are down, use of force instances are down. Each of those has some differences from AB 392, but they all use the term necessary. This isn't radical. This isn't experimental. This is a best practice. None of those departments adopted the constitutional minimum of the Supreme Court. They went further. Recruiting and retention is a national problem in law enforcement. It's a national problem. And I think we could go a long way towards addressing our recruiting and retention problem if we take common sense, reasonable steps to begin to restore, to build trust between those that police and the communities that are policing. If we want to lower the danger of lawsuits, we sit in closed session every week. We get sued all the time now. If you want to lower the danger of lawsuits, then you should take action to lower the use of force. I agree, training is vital. Last year, $25 million was put in the budget for training, but you train to the standard. And if you don't change the standard, then more training won't have the desired effect. This is an issue of respect. This is about respect for law enforcement. This is about respect for the difficult job that they do. This is about respect for the fact that every one of those departments I mentioned that saw reductions in the use of force, that saw reductions in the number of shootings, none of them went out and recruited an entirely new crop of officers. It was the same folks with a different standard and with different training, which tells you where the problem lies. It's not with the individual officers. It's with the systems we put in place. And this is also about respect for the community. It's about respect for those families who have an experience and a perspective and a daily life that is fundamentally different than mine, but one that I can understand and one that I can speak to. In closing, I spent a decade in the Marine Corps, and other than the order of our ceremony at the Marine Corps birthday, we strive to continually change. We don't adhere to 150-year-old policies. We adapt to changes. In one combat deployment, we changed the use of force during them. We went from hostile intent to hostile action, a fundamentally different change, and we were able to adapt. We were able to change. We were able to fulfill our mission. I do believe that we do best by putting in place policies that acknowledge the reality of the circumstances in our community, that take into account best practices, that take into account how we equip and train and empower our officers to hold true to the true spirit of to protect and to serve. This bill will not solve all of our societal problems. They are much bigger than this one issue. But it will show that we understand and we're serious about moving forward, and I support AB 392. And I hope Dr. Weber and the negotiations going forward can be fruitful, and I hope that we can pass something that not only has the support of the community, but has the support of law enforcement so that we can all move forward together. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor. You mentioned two words that I think are really significant, and those are the words necessary versus reasonable. And that's the underlying issue here. There are a lot of other issues that I think we all agree on. Improving the standards, the training, de-escalation techniques, and so on. But I want to ask our council, because we're here in San Diego County, and we do know the threat of litigation. So if AB 392 is passed with the word necessary in it, does that put taxpayers in jeopardy? Does it increase our chances of litigation versus what is now reasonable in terms of what we're dealing with here?
Chairwoman Jacob, this is a complex question to answer. If you have a lawsuit with this standard, then the chance of success of the plaintiff is going to be much greater with that different standard. So in answering your question, will it make a difference as far as the lawsuits are concerned? Yes, and if you wanted more, there are elements to the law that we have looked at that we think would create potential for more potential for liability. And I don't want to get into what those would be unless we were in closed session to talk about that. But if it is correct, if you say, is that going to impact the taxpayers, the element that I wouldn't know the answer to is the element that has been raised by Supervisor Fletcher. If the numbers of use of force drop because of that, then obviously that would have an impact as well. What is going to be the impact? What kinds of cases would you have? That's another element that you have to consider. But if everything were to stay the same as far as the number of cases that we have and the types of cases that are brought forward, I'd expect that you would see the liability increase, and I don't know that would have an impact on the awards, but the number of cases that would move forward and we could be potentially found liable on, I would think would be growing.
If there was a change in the word necessary?
To the reasonable standard that we have now, where there is more discretion given, then that would certainly make it easier for us as far as defending the lawsuit is concerned, and you'd be basically where we are now. That's correct.
I'm kind of confused at what you just said.
I have a question for our counsel.
The word reasonable is in place now.
That's correct. And
if it was changed to necessary, are we at risk for more litigation or not?
Yes, if everything else stays the same. Yes, if the number of lawsuits, if the number of shootings,
Okay.
if the number of shootings you have and the number of the use of force cases you have remains the same, then yes, I think you're going to have a higher chance of more cases.
That was my question. So we haven't heard Supervisor Desmond.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. This is rough. This is you heard a lot of emotion, a lot of outpouring from the community here, and to me, the difference between reasonable and necessary is not going to fix things, whether the word is reasonable or necessary. Most of the situations that were described today when somebody was shot or killed, to me, fall under the reasonable interpretation. They all sounded very unreasonable. And so if either word would have been in place, those sounded like the situations would have fallen under either one. A lot of the outcomes, though, of the shootings are determined by the judges. They're not determined by this body here. And I don't really think that, the effect today is to change. I don't think it's going to make much difference if we change the word from reasonable to necessary or back and forth. What we want to accomplish, though, is have fewer people killed. We want to have fewer people in the jails, fewer people of color in the jails, and society to be more law-abiding. And we also want to be able to back our police officers. So I really don't think it comes down to necessary or reasonable, but I do think it comes down to standards and training supplied to our police officers so that they know that we will have their backs, but they also need to know that they have the training to change the mindset, to hopefully use legal or lethal force as a very, very last resort. So the motion put forth by the chair today has that language in there to increase the training and make sure that our law enforcement have the tools and the training they need to keep us all safe, regardless of color. So I'm still going to support the motion.
Supervisor Fletcher?
Thank you. Just on this notion of risk, I don't know if we should make public policy on this notion of risk. I don't know that we should make public policy decisions based on the potential that someone may sue us or not sue us. I think we should make public policy decisions on what we believe is the right public policy to serve the public. I think we get in great danger when we start viewing it through that lens. I agree that it comes down to standards, which is why I think the standard has to change. I agree that training is vitally important, but for the training to be effective, you train to the standard. And so, I think those two are true, and I guess my question to County Council is, given that every jurisdiction that has done that has seen a significant decrease in use of force and number of shootings, is it also not as equally possible, even though I don't think risk is the prime determinant of what we do, but is it not possible that if our experience mirrored every other experience, that we could see a decrease in the amount of litigation?
Yes, that's my point. What's all going to matter is how many lawsuits we get in the door. And if the number goes down, then your exposure goes down.
Okay. Any other discussion? We have a motion and a second. Please vote.
Chairwoman Jacob, that motion passes with Vice Chairman Cox and Supervisor Fletcher voting no, all other supervisors being present and voting aye.
Thank you. We do have two more items.
Our next item for discussion is item number 12, General Services Sale of Real Property, 0.2 acres located at 113 Francis Drive, El Cajon, County Parcel Number 2017-0149-A.
Our meeting is not over. I would ask for people to... Please proceed. Please proceed.
APN 399-170-16. Following are the procedures for the bid. I will open all written bids and announce the bidder's name and amount. County Council will examine all written bids for conformity to the terms of the sale resolution. The minimum acceptable bid for this property is $45,500.